Great. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome. As Liz mentioned, I'm Kerri Kerr. I'm Chief Operating Officer at Avalon Consulting. We are a consulting firm for nonprofit fundraising programs and guide nonprofits on how to best optimize their fundraising outreach. So I'm really excited to join you today. I'm calling in from Williamsburg, Virginia. And I'm going to give you an overview of what's going on in the nonprofit direct response industry. It's been a bit of a crazy time in the last 3 years, not just for us, but for the world in general. But that comes with some challenges and also some opportunities. And so I'm going to kind of walk you through the beauty of direct response is that it's so data driven. So we have a lot of data, a lot of ways we can learn from the past and apply that to the future. But to start with, let me get this to move. What's happening? As I said, a lot. We've got this donor audience sitting here with this swirling cloud of chaos going on around them. And obviously none of these points are new to you. You absolutely have experienced these yourself. But we have environmental factors going on from the COVID pandemic, the social justice movement, war in Ukraine, political unrest at home. We've got the financial aspect impacting the direct response world from market volatility, inflation, potential recession, and how that impacts the donor's mindset when they're thinking about whether or not they support a nonprofit. And then we've got all the kind of trickle down impacts of all of these things with the supply chain issues, transportation. We're moving stuff around. We're still mailing a lot of direct mail, and we're having raw material shortages. There has been a increased competition for paper supply. Amazon has taken off and redirected all that sheet paper into cardboard production. And so sheet paper pricing is increasing, and even certain specialty stocks. A lot of nonprofits had success mailing labels in their packages, and label stock is almost impossible to get a hold of right now. And when you can, you're paying through the roof for it. So causing us to make a lot of shifts in those areas too. And as I mentioned, then that kind of feeds into our industry itself in terms of those paper pricing and paper prices going up. The USPS has said they're going to be increasing postage prices twice annually for at least the near future. So that's a significant part of a nonprofit direct marketing budget. And then higher gas prices are translating to higher shipping costs. We have caging delays when the gifts come in and they need to be processed. It's really important that that happen in a timely fashion so the donor feels good and gets acknowledged in a short window of time after making that gift. And those caging operations are short-staffed and running into issues as well. So lots going on. And as I mentioned, we're not alone. You can see the consumer confidence index has been a little bit crazy, in particular since 2020, where there was that sharp decrease. And we do tend to see consumer donation behavior and nonprofit support tied somewhat to consumer confidence. But what was really interesting is that we didn't see that happen when COVID hit. So this slide has a lot going on. This is looking at a particular company's caging. So they get the gifts from multiple nonprofits, and they tracked what was going on from 2019. Unfortunately, this cut off at 2022 in June. But you can see how we started in 2020 fairly well, pretty even with 2019. The pandemic hit in the US in March, and it really didn't have a big impact. That's when we start to see consumer confidence really drop off, but donations and fundraising held. Then we hit the social justice movement when George Floyd was murdered, and we saw this rapid escalation in donations. It kind of drove increases in support across all different industries, just really rallied people to support what they were passionate about. So you could see that we had surges in giving above 2019 through those months. And then we went into 2021 and we hit new record highs. So it wasn't just this bump that then kind of settled out. And in fact, we saw some pretty significant increases in 2021 over 2020. What happened in then 2022 is we started to see a little bit of a decrease. And it's so a big question in our industry is we call this COVID bubble, this rallying cry of everybody wanting to kind of get out there and do something positive to support what they believed in. Well, are we deflating now? Is this bursting? And we said, well, it's just deflating a little. We're down from the highs of 2021, but we are nowhere near where we were prior to the pandemic. So it's a little bit of a resettling at the moment. What's going on behind these numbers? We just had this surge in donors and donations during that COVID pandemic. And what's happened now in 2021 and 2022 and now 2023 is those COVID donors are moving into a more mature part of the file. New donors are always very volatile. They don't have the highest retention. And once you can keep a donor for a number of years, they really settle in and have pretty strong retention if you're doing your program right. But in the industry, we've often had what we call disaster donors, where there's a environmental event and people, or another type of event that causes a surge in people wanting to come out and support. And you get this huge increase in giving, and then all those people kind of disappear. So one of the questions was, are COVID donors like this? Is this what we're going to see? And the great news was they weren't. They really were engaged, not just a one and done type of gift. They came in, they made a gift to the nonprofit, and then they kept making gifts to that nonprofit. They stayed. And so that's really exciting. This is a different audience that has come into these nonprofit programs in the last 2 years. And now that they're settling into older donors, this is great because they're going to be continuing to increase their engagement. The bad news, and I put bad in quotes, is that there are a lot of them. And so when we look at file metrics, because so much of our work is driven by that data, this group is going to cause a huge shift. We're seeing even right now, overall retention coming down slightly, and it's not necessarily a problem. It's just that we have a huge swarm of 2-year donors coming in that are impacting the overall retention metrics. So it's really important that nonprofits are taking a look at retention by each year category to understand the overall influence. So what was really exciting is that prior to COVID, the donor counts had been declining for 2 decades, and across every type of donor: generational, education, income, religion, race, and ethnicity, we were seeing declines. And COVID absolutely changed this trend. And the really great part is it wasn't just a surge of new people joining the ranks of these donors. It was also an activation at a higher level of existing donors. They gave higher amounts with their gifts. They gave more frequently. It was this double whammy of just beautiful engagement and support. Problem is, we're not seeing this hold out in 2022, and we're only a few days into 2023 yet. So unfortunately, I don't have any 2022 official benchmarks to share with you quite yet. But we all throughout 2022, we're seeing that slight decrease from those highs in 2021, and in particular in acquisition when we're trying to bring new donors into the nonprofits program. So again, kind of what did we have to learn from, and what did that mean for what we did in response and what we will be doing moving forward? We actually had some pretty significant kind of economic events in the past 20 years that nonprofits could look back to and learn from with their particular program and decide how they really wanted to react. The first and the biggest one in the most recent history, of course, was 9/11, a real shock to the entire country, deadliest terrorist attack in the US history for sure. And what happened was the immediate response for so many nonprofits was to pull back on their acquisition investment in particular. This isn't the time to be asking for new support. Let's really pull that back. The problem is they spent the next 6 years rebuilding their files from that initial pullback. It was a huge, huge impact across the industry on every nonprofit that pulled back in that investment in their direct marketing program. So then we came to the 2008-2009 recession. And we had the same thing, real uncertainty. We kind of saw this coming with corporate gifts started to pull back, and then we saw foundation support and major gifts pulling back. And these direct response programs were kind of the last piece to be really impacted. But a lot of organizations learned from their 9/11 experience and knew they had to cut some, but limited some of those cuts, tried to cut everything else they could before they cut their acquisition. And in response, what happened is we had a slight shrinking of files, but they were able to recover faster. And so it made a big difference in where they went from there. So when COVID hit and the social justice movement was underway, a lot of the same nonprofits went back and said, okay, here's what we've learned. We really want to kind of hold on here. This is another period of uncertainty. We don't know what will happen, but we know from the past and from our data that we really should try to maintain engagement through this period of uncertainty. And they did, and that's what drove those record levels of support and income that we saw. So there's been a lot to learn from. I have a few case studies just to show you how this played out with some particular programs. So this is a slide looking at how donors come into a particular nonprofit's file. And we always say that acquisition is a building block for a program. So every year you're putting a new brick in the wall that creates your donor program. And the size of the brick you put on a wall in a particular year stays with you for the lifetime of your program. The brick erodes over time because 100% of donors don't stay, but if you put a nice big brick on your program, that will stay with you for the next 10 to 15 years. And you can see in this case, we are looking at the top color in each bar graph is the new audience brought to that program in that year. So this nonprofit had been putting a pretty strong flow of new donors into their program for quite a while. And it was leading to some fairly stable file results. But then as we headed into the recession, they did a significant cut in their acquisition. So these bricks they put on the wall in these years were very, very small. And what happened was they took a program of this size and drove it down to a program of this size. So even in more recent years, the file size, and with the increase in acquisition, they've been trying to grow it back. It's still only 30% of what it was. This is another nonprofit with a similar view, and you can see again in 2000, their fiscal year 2002, but it was calendar year 2001. This is 9/11 here, so they also pulled back on their acquisition investment, not as much as the prior group, and then immediately started a reinvestment and were able to grow. And in the recession, they pulled back again, but not as far as they had in 9/11. And you can see that they were able to return more quickly to their pre-recession file size. You've probably all heard about this case study because it's famous in our industry, but in 2013, the American Cancer Society decided to try a really radical approach to their fundraising program, and they cut their direct marketing acquisition. And what happened was they reported back themselves. They saw a really, really drastic decline in new donors and lost $11 million in that new donor revenue. And the problem is, as I talked about, you carry those bricks with you through the years. So that's not just a one-year hit. When they projected out the impact of that single year cut in acquisition, it resulted in a $30 million loss over the next decade in their program because those donors just weren't there to upgrade, to continue to engage. And this was a really interesting case study. And they reinstated direct mail immediately a year later. It's a common reaction when times get hard or new leadership comes to an organization and they look at the amount a nonprofit is spending on acquisition, because acquisition is always a net loss. It's an investment in the future of the program. And often, especially when people are looking at direct mail, they think that digital's free. Why are we putting money in this program? Let's just focus over on digital. And that was a little bit of what American Cancer was thinking. They also were looking at the age of their donors, who were average age 65, which is the average age of most donors. And they wanted to see their donor file more reflect their event file, the people who were engaging with them in their Race for the Cure and the various other events that they had. And so they felt by switching completely their investment to the digital area that they would be able to grow that younger donor file, have more money, be able to engage those people for a longer time. The problem is, in direct response, everything's related. And what they didn't clearly see was that about 40% of their online revenue was driven by direct mail. And this isn't the case for just this organization. There's a reason that you're getting catalogs now from Amazon and Wayfair, these kind of online only retailers. They see the value in those multi-channel touch points in driving action. And so what happened was they really just pulled the rug out from under their program, and it had this pretty catastrophic effect over time. So it's not just the various environmental impacts going on in terms of COVID and the industry at large. We also have the elections going on. And one of the big questions we always get is, well, we just had midterms. What about the upcoming presidential election? It's a really contentious political environment going on right now. What's going to happen? And we actually don't see elections have a negative effect on overall fundraising. We basically see that people are more energized in election years on both sides, and you see a swell in support. It's not that they give less, they actually give more. So if you are a political organization and you lean strongly in one direction and your friend is in the White House, you could see a slight suppression because there's in your giving, because there's always this like, whew, we won, we're good now. And the other side is super activated. But that's when you really have to dig deep and make sure your messaging is still kind of representing the need to your donors. But most nonprofits, you aren't political, have a pretty good mix of both Democrats and Republicans in the file. And while one might decline, the other increases. And so it really comes out as a wash. And consistently, we do see very strong year-end fundraising following elections, and it'll be, again, interesting to get the final results from the most recent year-end fundraising we just had. Because again, the whole country's kind of energized and paying attention, and so more likely to act and support the causes they care about. So what should we anticipate? What does this mean for the industry moving forward? One of the biggest questions we get from clients is like, well, how will we know the recession's coming? What do we do? And again, going back to 2008, we did see signs. Those corporate and major gifts were absolutely starting to pull back. And then we saw this is where digital campaigns can be a really healthy kind of early indicator of what's going on. We started to see a lack in response there. We started to see open rates declining a bit. The next thing to go is usually that acquisition. So your core donors will kind of stay with you as long as they can, but you start to see new donors being less likely to come on board and help you out. So you'll start to see the acquisition softening, then the appeals, and then finally renewal. Appeals are additional gifts that you ask for during the year. And then finally the renewal, which is kind of the annual support ask that nonprofits send out. So this is kind of how it flows. This is where the data can tell us what's coming, and we can put a plan in place and respond. It's also important to note that different nonprofits see this play out in different degrees. So arts and culture are often seen as nice to have add-ons to someone's life, not necessarily a core defining priority in their life, like supporting a cancer society or supporting an environmental cause. So they tend to restrict first. So we can also look in the culture index and see they're the first to restrict, they're also the first to return. Because as soon as people are feeling better, they're like, I'm going back to my favorite theater and going to keep supporting them. I'm celebrating the return here. So the other things that we're going to be watching in the industry are these retention metrics, because we do have that massive group of COVID joins coming into the second and third year on the file. And then we have the lower acquisition volumes that we're seeing from 2022. And so that's all going to impact retention overall. And we need to understand and be able to respond. It's also going to be really important to look at that acquisition investment. I talked about it being an area most people want to cut, but it's actually really important that it be a strategic planned area in these programs because retention isn't 100%. In fact, most often retention is around 60%. So every year, nonprofits have to replace about 40% of their file just to keep their file size flat. So if you want to grow your file, which most nonprofits do, your acquisition investment needs to be enough to drive that growth. We're also going to be continuing to watch these rising package costs. This is really still a direct marketing dominant world. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But when package costs keep increasing and postage costs keep increasing, you can't just blindly move forward. We have to go in and look and say, do we need to be mailing these labels? Are they truly driving more response for this particular group? And should everybody be getting this mailing? And so really looking at the audience we're reaching out to and what is effective given the higher cost. Also looking at a certain point, you do need to move your investment to a different channel and really make sure you're getting the strongest return, no matter where that comes from. And then we're also looking at those key performance indicators and the kind of level of engagement we're seeing from the existing donor file. Average gifts have been really strong. People have dug deep and given more than they ever have before. It's really encouraging. Also seeing second gift rates increase. So I mentioned, a lot of people will come in and try an organization out with that first gift, but it's once they make the second gift that you have a really committed donor. And we're seeing an increase in second gift rates through the pandemic, through the social justice movement. That's again starting to soften a bit. So we'll be looking at the 2022 data on that and seeing where it takes us into 2023. And then upgrades. Nonprofits really want a long-term relationship with their donors. The $5 one and done gift is fine, we'll take it, but where the nonprofit really can grow and fully fund their mission is in those long-term donors who want to keep engaging with you, either through consistent gifts year over year or through moving up the donor pipeline into mid-level giving, major giving, and then, of course, planned giving. So we're keeping an eye on all of those metrics for sure as well. We're also seeing these shifting engagement channels in the industry. This is, again, we don't have 2022 benchmarks yet, but 2021 saw a 9% increase in overall giving. Of the total giving, 12% of it came from online sources. And I think people are often shocked that that's as small as it is as an average. But I think it's important to note the Department of Commerce reports that about 13% of all commerce is e-commerce. So once again, that kind of consumer behavior and donating behavior are in lockstep there. But it's really important to note that the digital channel is growing. It's growing by leaps and bounds, and that's really important. In fact, digital alone grew 9% from 2020 to 2021 as well. So we're also seeing this shift into more and more of the donors being comfortable engaging through a mobile device. Makes sense. We're pretty much all have our phones permanently glued to our hands. So it's important to note that direct mail isn't dead yet. It's still driving 80% of overall nonprofit fundraising, but digital's growing, and we can't afford to sit back and not be engaging members and donors where they are. And we need to be getting out into some of these new channels and trying them, because we do know that direct mail expenses are continuing to grow. So it's important that we embrace this evolving digital landscape. Now, the digital landscape still comes with evolving challenges as well, because just as quickly as new platforms are coming out and new ways to engage donors are being presented, we're also getting shifting privacy regulations. And just as everyone had maximized their email outreach and really knew what they were doing, Apple came along with mail privacy protection and kind of negated our ability to see into the actions that were going on in the emails that people read through the mail app. So it's just those types of things involve our ability to continue pivoting, to continue learning, figuring out how we can access some of the data we really need. I think many of us can remember when our mailboxes were stuffed full of junk and email was novel and exciting to get. And now we almost have the exact reverse in play. We're drowning in email, we're exhausted by it, and our mailboxes are almost empty. And so those are some of the trends that the Wayfairs and the Amazons are realizing as well, and starting to take advantage of some attention and some space in that area and engaging people that way. So it's really about meeting the donor where they are and continuing to respond. I talked a lot about numbers, but it's so important to remember behind all these numbers are real people with a passion for these nonprofits and trying to make a difference and have a legacy in this world. And it's exciting and it's heartwarming. And we have a lot of shifts going on there too. We have donation and nonprofit support has been dominated by boomers for a while, and they are still generating 43 or 41% of nonprofit giving contributions. So there's still the real big piece of the pie there. But Gen X is coming into their own. They kind of get forgotten about because millennials steal all the attention. But Gen X is starting to hit their prime earning years. And the older part of the generation is finally getting their kids through college. And what we tend to see is that donation behavior isn't really tied to a generational identity, or a specific age. It's more about your time in life and where you are in terms of disposable income. And so by the time the average donor, as I mentioned before, is age 65, that doesn't mean that there aren't 22-year-olds donating to nonprofits. There absolutely are, and they're awesome. But they are not the ones that are continuing to give and to upgrade, though they're still kind of more likely to support an event or a friend in a race. And part of that is because they haven't had those life-defining events yet. And as you live through your life and you reach the age of 65, you've had a lot happen, and it's really helped you hone in on what's important to you and what you want your legacy to be. And that's what really starts to drive donation behavior and that consistent ongoing relationship. So we tend to see that people grow into giving rather than just having to be motivated by a particular cause. I think it's also, people say, well, it's 80% direct marketing world. These millennials grew up with a phone in their hand for sure. Are they going to want to give via direct mail? Is this when the full shift to digital will happen? And I think the shift is absolutely happening. However, some of the initial studies have shown that millennials love direct mail because no one's ever sent them an actual letter. Their whole life has been digital, and now they have something to hold in their hand with their name on it that somebody sent them. So it remains to be seen as they age into that kind of prime donor audience, what will happen with these newer generations that are more tech savvy than the baby boomers and the matures. Although one of the things with the pandemic that we did see was it kind of pushed everybody to become a bit more tech savvy in that, we saw a surge in the use of QR codes. And people who couldn't figure them out before finally figured them out, and we're able to use them in fundraising with a lot more success than we were prior to the pandemic, and seeing a lot more people comfortable using that QR code on a reply form to be able to make a gift online. So it's pushing us all out of our comfort zone and starting to create some new behaviors in the marketplace. I know you're about to have a session after this on engaging the Latinx audience. And this topic honestly could cover multiple sessions, but it's really important to stop and think about the fact that audiences are changing. The United States of 50 years ago does not look the same as the United States of today. And direct marketing in general has been slow to realize that, particularly in the nonprofit area. And so the social justice movement has caused a bit of a reevaluation of how our industry thinks about our target audiences and how we go about engaging them. I think it's important to take a step back and kind of remember how nonprofit direct response began. It actually grew out of the catalog industry. So when nonprofits realized that they didn't have to just kind of sit there and have donors stumble upon them and come to them and support them, they realized that they could mail some lists and ask people, get out there, get the message out and ask people to join them. And the lists that were available at that time were those catalog lists, which had been built upon a bunch of Caucasian catalog buyers. So when the nonprofits reached out to those lists, guess what? They got Caucasian donors. And then nonprofits tend to share lists with each other. So guess what? They got more Caucasian donors. And what we have is an entire industry that really is based around the Caucasian donor. And everything has been developed in support of that. Every test they've done has been on a Caucasian audience. And so they've driven results over and over again to what engages the Caucasian audience in the best way. And that's where it's really time to stop and step back. And we as direct marketers have a responsibility here to really question how we're setting up these programs and how we're engaging. So the list market itself really is kind of already fairly Caucasian focused. In fact, a lot of organizations think the solution to this is just renting the NAACP list and mailing that, and then we'll get a more diverse donor audience. Well, the NAACP list is majority Caucasian. So again, it's this self-fulfilling dynamic that's at play. So this is where new channels, digital, getting out there and meeting donors where they are, where these prospective donor audiences are, because the current systems we've built are just reinforcing the current dynamic. And so it's time to think bigger and to really realize the barriers that we've put up unknowingly in many cases, and start to take those down. A lot of the things that that we want to be able to do, it's often hard to get demographic information on your file. And so we have a lot of our nonprofit clients saying, hey, it's really important to us that we do reach out to a more diverse audience, that our donors are coming from multiple backgrounds and helping and engaging with our cause. But it's not just a matter of reaching out to that audience. You actually have to have something to offer them. So is your mission, is your work showing that these donors can see themselves or see an issue they're passionate about in your mission? Because it's not just about mailing to a new audience. It's about having something that engages them and actually speaks to their passions. And so that's where we encourage these nonprofits to start with is, hey, take a look at what you're asking and what you're doing and how you're impacting those audiences around the world. So what does all this mean? A lot of data, and we're watching the data all the time, but it's also really important to listen. All of these nonprofits have donor services, and they get a lot of calls. People very rarely call to tell you that you're awesome, but they call a lot when they're upset. And it's important to listen to it, because that person's probably telling you something 10 other people are thinking, but they're not bothering to call. So it is important to track those kind of responses, and to, when you're missing the mark with your file, to really make adjustments and be responsive to the moment. Same thing, we're watching those digital campaigns. What are they telling us? Oftentimes a direct mail campaign can take 3 months in production to get out the door. And a digital campaign can be done in 24 hours. So you get out there, and that happened during COVID, where we had some digital campaigns that were already mailing just as all sending just as all the shutdowns were happening. And we saw engagement holding. So that gave us the courage to continue to let the direct mail go and be able to keep moving. But it's also really important that we make adjustments and respond to the moment with what's going on in our campaigns. Some of the things we had ready to go during COVID were certain direct mail pieces that had teasers that said, "Have we lost you?" Well, that takes on a whole new meaning in a world pandemic where people are dying. Similarly, a lot of fundraisers use a rising thermometer to show the success of a campaign. Not a really good idea when people are panicked about a deadly virus. So responding to those moments. We're also taking the DEI focus here too, and realizing that when we tell stories in our direct marketing, because it's really important to humanize the work that we're doing, we need to make sure that anybody featured in those stories, whose story is being told, would be proud to read that copy. Because otherwise, all we're doing is victimizing that person. And that is not the point of our outreach. So we have a process in our company where that's a part of our checklist is, would the person featured here be proud to read this? And of course, we always get permission and make sure they are proud and do feel that represented them well. So again, it's not okay to just tell a person's story without their permission and in a way that makes them not proud. So we have to keep defending the investment in these programs. We're going to get, in the future, we're going to get a lot of pushback, especially if we head into a recession. People will want to cut. And what does that mean? We have to be ready with the data from the past few economic times that have really caused some impact on these programs to be able to show the case to leadership on why you need to keep going. And in particular, we need to learn from that American Cancer Society example of how decisions today don't just impact the next year. So yes, cutting acquisition is a great way to save net revenue in a particular year, but you just pulled out net revenue for your next 10 years. And that's what organizations need to kind of understand. So it's real, and it's important to kind of keep that shift going as direct mail costs increase and as more digital platforms and engagement opportunities become available and more effective. We have to be willing to move that investment around. Nonprofits don't have endless budgets. American Cancer Society did that cut to be able to really focus on digital. It shouldn't have to be an either or situation. It should be both and, but it doesn't have to be that extreme. So take the bottom performing acquisition audience that's already risky for you to mail anyway, because you're not getting great performance from them, and redirect that expense into some new digital channels and see what your return on investment is in that area. So we need to encourage this kind of continued flexibility. A lot of times nonprofits just want that predictability. They want to set it and forget it, and we can't do that. So what do we think the industry will hold in the year ahead based on all of this? We're going to continue to see this challenging acquisition market. It's absolutely what we've seen through 2022. We don't have any 2023 results yet, but it's definitely been a trend already and something we'll have to watch, because if that suppression and response has been such that the volume of new donors is not enough to offset the attrition of existing donors, then we're going to see shrinking donor files across a number of nonprofits, and that impacts everybody. As I mentioned, they share lists with each other. So a smaller donor list exchanged with another smaller donor list, it has a compounding impact. We do expect to see strong average gifts continue to hold, and that's great because it means while we aren't necessarily bringing in as many new donors, the donors we do have are increasing their commitment, and in many cases that's offsetting the loss of that new donor revenue. So it helps revenue for this year, but again, that file size contraction will have a negative impact over future years. But we definitely need those strong average gifts to keep holding revenue stable. We do expect to see continued strong performance as these COVID donors age and continue to move throughout the file segments. So that's an exciting thing to see how they continue to engage. We absolutely know rising costs and supply chain issues are not going away anytime soon, and this is going to involve some of the biggest pivots. I mentioned that direct mail packages often take 3 months to get into production and out the door. We're actually seeing that increasing upwards of 5 months now. You just have to order your paper so far in advance to make sure you have it on time and can get it out the door on deadline. We do expect to see a slight increase if we enter a recession. Giving USA has shown in the past that in times of recessions, the impact is really about a 2.7%, around a 3% suppression in overall giving. but it's followed by a rebound. So this is again where we would expect to see a bit of a decrease, but it will rebound fairly quickly after a recession. So hold the course. This is another reason why these direct marketing and direct response programs are so important in a nonprofit's portfolio, because in a recession, you definitely aren't going to see your corporate and your foundation and major gift support decrease by 3%. You're going to see a much larger drop off there. And this is where that direct response program can be that stabilizing force in the overall funding portfolio for a nonprofit. We do expect to see this expanding multi-channel outreach. Digital is growing, and we need to be where the donor is and continuing to test the new options that are available to us, whether that's reaching out through texting or connected TV ads and all sorts of things that we can try to reach and engage. Social media, of course. Although we haven't had a ton of success raising money in social media. It's a great engagement platform and a great way to get your message out there. But it's really important that we continue to test these channels and come back and work on different messaging with different audiences. And then we're going to continue to see those generational shifts. Gen X is going to come into their own, into that prime donor audience age, and millennials are going to be a huge force coming right behind them. And then, of course, Gen Z is graduating from college and entering the workforce themselves. And those ethnic demographics are going to hopefully continue to shift. And this is on us. To make it happen. It's not something that will happen if we continue with business as usual. So how do we prepare for all of this? We know this is coming. What do we do? Again, it's really about embracing this radical change and seeing it as an opportunity. It's important to take this time to rethink how we are reaching out to these audiences and to learn from what we've done in the past. Preparation is absolutely power, and we have learned from these several different episodes of economic challenge that pivoting is necessary. It's not just blindly staying the course, it's learning from the past and applying that to where you are and not being afraid to change. And along those same lines, looking at those new options. What can we do? If this isn't working, if direct mail packages are getting so expensive that you can't afford to mail them to your entire audience, where can you take that investment and put it in some new technologies and be able to engage people in a new and fun way? So it may be a chaotic time in the direct response world, nonprofit direct response industry, but it's also an exciting time to kind of redefine what we stand for and who we engage, to embrace new techniques and technologies and pivot when required, because at the end of the day, these nonprofits are depending on these programs to drive this critical support for their missions. And we want to make sure we're there to provide that for them. Thank you. Questions?
I would say that everyone, not just the nonprofit industry, but anybody in the direct response and even the e-commerce world, has been upended in some way or another by the challenges that Kerri has been talking about. I was interested, those of you who teach retail, do you or anybody else, has anybody been teaching about the effect of the last couple of years on business? Brooke, are you raising your hand? No, that's me, sorry.
Oh, somebody is.
I'll just say at George Mason, we have a new center strongly supported by the marketing area. And the big changes, we have every 2 to 3 weeks broadcast to the retail participants in our program. And the impact of technology across each of the sectors in retail, everything from AI to scheduling, pickups, and so on, it's extraordinaire. So I think retail is rebounding and being very flexible. And there's a lot of R&D going into that huge industry.
Interesting. Thank you, Betsy. Tatiana, you have your hand raised.
Oh, yes, thank you. I had a question actually for Kerri. I was curious, given that the corporate profits are surging for many companies during COVID times, do nonprofits get engaged with the corporate kind of co-branding strategies? Because I would assume that some of the brands would try to build a community, right, supporting certain causes. So you have a young generation that wants to belong to this consumer base while supporting the nonprofits. And so I was just wondering if you have any collaborations like that going on.
Yes, we don't personally manage it, but I do have clients that are in partnership. I think Subaru is a great example of that with the national parks. There's a lot of partnerships that are being established like that to show the connection. And you're right, that again, speaking in a great way to things that younger generations value and want to know that they're support of certain corporate products is equally aligned with their passion and their personal values. So I don't run those programs, but I agree with you that that is an area that is growing. I do wish as corporations saw larger surges in profits in general, that the nonprofits would see the benefit from that. And I have to say that's not necessarily been the case. They're equally concerned about recession, on the horizon, and we haven't seen a surge in corporate giving as a result. Yet, but partnerships are definitely a new area for several of them to continue to investigate and engage in.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, if consumers would be more responsive if they see their favorite brands attached to those direct mail kind of communications that you're sending out.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Kind of, yeah, we don't tend to do it in reverse. So for instance, one of our clients is the National Parks Conservation Association, and they have that relationship with Subaru and also one with Nature's Valley granola bars. So personally, as their fundraising consultant, I love it when I go into the grocery store and see their logo on the Nature's Valley granola bars. Like, great, good exposure. I like that. But I don't necessarily want to put Subaru in our direct, or Nature's Valley granola bars in our direct marketing materials that way. We haven't done a kind of partnership in our materials. It's listed on their website. They have it in various digital channels. But we have not used that in direct marketing yet.
I will say, yes, that I do think, as you said, Kerri, one way it's been used, we have a client who serves the LGBTQ population, and H&M and many, many, many other retail brands have joined with them. And one way that they've sort of partnered is that they have sponsored matches. So during like end of year or special campaigns during the year. So they'll say, H&M is giving us $100,000. If you all can match it, we'll get another 100,000. So that is one way that, organizations are
leveraging.
I don't want to be crass, investing in causes that are aligning them with the populations that they serve.
Absolutely. And that's a great point, Liz. Matches are critical in direct marketing fundraising, especially at year end. And oftentimes major donors can be a bit hesitant to put their name out there, but corporations are usually pretty happy to put their name out there. And so being able to do that to motivate more giving from the lower level file is key. It was a great opportunity. Anything I said that was just completely shocking to you or contrary to what you thought?
I will say when I taught digital that students were just shocked that only 12% or 13% of sales are from e-commerce, that they thought the whole world was digital and that mail didn't exist. So I'm wondering, what is your experience with your students?
I would concur 100%. Every project is digital.
Yep.
Does anybody teach direct mail or have it as a class or overview?
We teach it as a part of a total IMC, as part of a choice or strategy.
I just teach one lecture in my marketing when I talk about experimentation and testing, and I use direct mail because I came from the direct mail industry experience, and so I bring actually examples and I show here's the 2 flyers, here's the 2 mailings, and talk about the experimentation. That's how I expose them to that topic a little bit.
Great.
It's fascinating. One of the things that we all learn in this industry is that you have to remove yourself from guessing what will work. You need to let the data tell you, because the kiss of death is to love a particular package or email a lot, because it just won't work. And even it's funny in some focus groups where you ask people like, would you give for this package or would you be more likely to open this one? And they all tend to go for the 4-color bright. Yeah, that's the one that would catch my eye in the mailbox. And the one that wins every single time is the plain white envelope. So again, it's just this kind of what we think drives us to action and what actually drives us to action are often the opposite.
I think also you touched on this, Kerri, that I think is really important in terms of the channel movement, which is that we are seeing an increasing trend of folks. QR codes helped tremendously. The use of QR codes by restaurants got people, much more comfortable with it during COVID. But QR codes and also just a URL on mail pieces, we're actually able to track that now in a very fine way through analytics. And we're seeing, at least we are, I'd love for other agency folks to weigh in, seeing just a much larger trend of folks giving online. Absolutely. From direct mail. And there's some value to that too, at least in my perspective. Please, you guys jump in, that those people are giving a higher average gift online. Yes. And so it's a greater value to the organizations.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would say I'm Jordan. I'm another PI co-chair. I'm at another agency, Lotman Maskenil and Company, and we've successfully tested into QR codes both inside the package. We were a little cautious at first, trying it first in the PS of a letter. We've migrated to envelopes. We're now doing it. People are responding. And for us, another great thing about this is, yes, average gift is higher, but donors are one-time donors, people that, tend to give a gift every year. In the mail, they're going online, they're making their gift, but they're also converting to sustainers. So, having that toggle between making a one-time gift or a monthly gift, we're seeing so many people click on that monthly option, and having those monthly donors, having those sustainers is just, the return on investment there is just so much stronger. Their retention is so much better. So we're really seeing a win-win across the board.
Yeah, I think the other area we've seen really consistently continue to grow is texting, giving via texting. Just again, as more and more people are so comfortable using their phones and having them on them all the time. We actually just recently had a really interesting test with a client who was raising a decent amount from texting itself and able to cover the cost of the texting and all of that. But we did a test to see if people who got the text ended up giving more to the direct mail than people who didn't get a text. And so we did a kind of a audience split on that. And we saw a surge in the direct mail giving for the people that got the text. So they didn't even give to the text, but that touch point helped them respond to the direct mail, similar to that direct mail piece with the URL sending you online. It's that multi-channel kind of just present the donor with options. We don't care how they give, just that they give. Well, thank you all so much for allowing me to join you today. And I hope this was helpful and wish you all the best of luck with your academic years.
Thank you so much, Kerri. Did a wonderful job.
Thanks,
Kerri.
Thank you.
Pleasure.